At exactly this time, on June the 18th, at 5:30, 199 years ago, General Blucher rode over the hill at Waterloo to rescue Wellington and finally defeat Napoleon. And that is why downstairs in the Livery Hall, we do have a French session, which includes the former Prime Minister of France, François Fillon, who could well be the future President of France as well. But here we considered the industry sector, which is perhaps most intimately concerned with debates around liberty and innovation, the media. From concerns over restrictions to freedom of speech to heavy-handed regulation, this is an industry where discussion of liberty has a practical and potent policy implications. Delighted to welcome Justin Webb and a very distinguished panel. We're one short because of an accident to Martha Lane Fox, but I'm sure our brilliant panelists will more than make up for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Tim. It's a real pleasure to be here. Just to introduce myself briefly, Justin Webb from the Today programme from the BBC. Don't seem to be that many people from the BBC chairing sessions today. I can't imagine why that is. I was delighted to get the invitation to come as an independent chairman. I'm not representing the BBC, of course, nor do I represent CPS, but I'm very happy to be here, although someone has tweeted, why is Justin Webb involved with a group of right-wing nutters? So I'm sure you'll take that in good part, as I do. It's a real pleasure, as Tim was saying, to have a distinguished panel. I'm sorry that Lady Lane Fox can't be here, but that just gives us more time for Rachel Whetstone, for Joanna Shields, and for Jonah Goldberg. What we're going to do is the same basic format. Each will speak for a little bit. We'll then throw it open, and I'm perfectly happy. Hey, I work on the Today programme. I can go on talking. I was going to say as much as any of my colleagues, possibly not as much as one or two of them. But anyway, I can go on talking for a long time, so that'll be fine. We can have our conversation. But should you wish to be involved, then you have the opportunity through those iPads, and I think one's going to be brought up to me. So if people have something either to say or a question to ask, do feel free, please, to take part, because we've got the time for that to happen. So without further ado, let me turn to Rachel Whetstone, who's the Senior Vice President of Communications and Public Policy at Google. Rachel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Justin. Thanks very much for having me. I think people always say it's a great honor to be here, but for me it truly is, because my grandfather, Anthony Fisher, was very involved with think tanks for much of his later life. He was helped get the IEA off the ground. And he did it on the advice of Hayek, who told him that if you want meaningful reform, you have to first change the intellectual climate of opinion. And I think were my grandfather alive today, I think he would have loved the internet, not just because he loved bright, shiny things, which he definitely did, but because he loved ideas. And the internet is nothing but home to lots of ideas, some of them good, some of them bad, and some of them very crazy. And in fact, as a sort of ardent proponent of free market capitalism in the 1960s, most people thought he was crazy. Now, when people talk about the internet, they tend to focus a lot on the freedoms that's brought, the ability to find information, to connect with anyone, to start a business that can instantly reach a global customer base. And as Morris said at dinner last night, you know, this has increased freedom for a lot of people around the world, and that's a very good thing. But for students of Hayek, you know, he thought very much about freedom and responsibility. And in his book, The Constitution of Liberty, he said liberty not only means that the individual has both the opportunity and the burden of choice, it also means that he must bear the consequences of his actions and will receive praise or blame for them. Liberty and responsibility are inseparable. So I wanted to spend a few minutes looking at how a website that we own, YouTube, deals with freedom and responsibility online. Don't worry, this is not an advertorial for YouTube. These are tremendously hard issues, and we make our fair share of mistakes. Indeed, you may well disagree with some of our decisions about what stays up and what comes down. But freedom of expression has never been absolute, and how you choose to draw the lines in practice matters tremendously to different communities. So to give you some context, more than 1 billion people come to YouTube every month, and they upload 100 hours of video every minute of every day. And the size of that audience means that many of the next generation of media companies are being launched on the platform. And unless you have teenagers at home, you may never have heard of many of these people who are on the screen now. And to fuel this creative economy, and it is a real economy, the top grossing UK creator on YouTube takes over £1.5 million last year, took home. We need to maintain a vibrant community, and that requires rules so that our users, creators, and the top brands that are advertising on the site can trust YouTube. It's why we have community guidelines that prohibit certain types of behavior, nudity, violence, hate speech, drug abuse, among others. And we have a very active community, think of it as a global neighborhood watch, that helps us police the content on the site. Every video has a flag. You can see a picture of the flag there beneath it. And on the next slide, as you can see, users here are asked to categorize content when they flag it. Using this flagging system, our global community reports 60,000 videos every day. And these videos are then reviewed by humans. Amazingly, in Silicon Valley, we still do employ humans. And they are there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And as you can see from the next slide, this is what the people are looking at. They get thumbnails, and that actually enables us to identify some types of content that we don't like pornography, very quickly. User flagging has resulted in the removal of more than 11 million videos in the last 2 years. Now, this is, as you can imagine, a huge logistical challenge. But in many ways, the logistics are actually the easy part. The hard part starts when you try to define exactly what constitutes pornography or violence or incitement to racial hatred. Let's start with pornography. Sorry, it's probably the first, so I thought I'd liven things up a bit. Some of the earliest videos that YouTube took down were porn. And that wasn't because pornography it was illegal. It was never illegal. It was because the founders of YouTube saw porn as a weed. And if they allowed it on the site, it would crowd out everything else. It was somewhat similar with nudity, which is also banned on the site. And this went back to YouTube's roots. YouTube was designed as a site. Broadcast yourself was its slogan. And there was a fear that the site would become all about people exposing themselves in their bedrooms. But you need exceptions even for pornography and nudity, like, for example, breastfeeding. You know, there was a lot of debate about whether people should be allowed to show pictures of people breastfeeding on Facebook. We've always allowed breastfeeding on YouTube, and we've always had a carve-out for artistic content, like this lovely man from the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, because you were probably wondering why he was there. Actually, if you went to YouTube to see that, he would be behind an age gate. And even for art, there isn't a universal carve-out. In March, trailers for the movie Nymphomaniac, which I'm not about to show you the trailer, were uploaded to the site. And there was no denying the context here. This was professionally made art house film. But the trailers showed sex. And we've drawn a line that even with artistic content, no sex acts on YouTube. Our community guidelines also prohibit violence. You know, we have to think a lot about content that's posted with the intent to shock and disgust. But again, we have exceptions for that type of content when it's documentary or newsworthy. And this has proven to be incredibly important with the influx of conflict footage that we started seeing in 2009, coming from Iraq and then Egypt, Syria, Libya, and most recently the Ukraine. And when we look at this footage, we think about whether there should be an upper threshold for the amount of violent or shocking content that people can see on YouTube. It's a bit like pornography. We have to think about the thresholds. And should people be able to see moment of death coverage on YouTube? And that's really stuff that we have to think about. This video shows Nida Sultan, the young woman who became the symbol of the Iranian protests in 2009. It quickly spread online. And when we first saw it on YouTube, we were shocked because it was so horrifically graphic and tragic. But after much debate, we decided to leave it up, along with thousands of other, sometimes gruesome and grueling conflict zone videos. And why do we do that? We do that because the footage is coming from places that face frequent media blackouts. If we took it off YouTube, it would be much harder for the world to know the truth. For example, earlier this year, there was a time when YouTube was the only place Ukrainians could see the violent riots that were taking place in their country because the government-controlled media had blocked all the other coverage. First-hand accounts like this ensure that the world is aware of events as they happen, which in turn can be critical to affecting change. And in places where state control of mass media is absolute, it can sometimes be the only way, which is why many regimes try and block YouTube and do successfully block YouTube. Finally, I wanted to talk about extremism. it's an issue that's been much in the news recently, especially in the UK. So I had some examples here from Anwar Al-Awlaki. There are lots of different kinds of Al-Awlaki videos on YouTube, but let me give you a flavor. Here he is on CNN. This is a news clip of a video he released threatening Americans. In the same way that you wouldn't ban the BBC or CNN from reporting this on television, it wouldn't make sense to ban this content just because it appears in a different format, in this case on a broadcast network's YouTube channel. Then there are Al-Awlaki videos that reference the jihad, but without an explicit call to violence. And again, these don't run foul of our incitement policies. But the last category that did, which I don't have to show you because we've taken it down, were his lecture, which was uploaded in a non-news context where he was talking about killing the Western pigs, and that obviously comes down. It's also very interesting on YouTube, the culture of counter-speech that is springing up, which is also very important when you're thinking about free speech arguments. For example, when you search for jihad on YouTube, you encounter content that condemns extremist views and questions interpretations of the Quran. Here's an imam explaining why a practicing Muslim cannot be a terrorist. He says a true Muslim cannot fight non-combatants. And there are entire playlists dedicated to Islam against extremism and terrorism. A playlist, for those of you that don't frequent YouTube, which may be a number of you in this audience, is a compilation of videos that play one after another. If you look at the series, the first in the series is Suicide Bombing is Wrong and Not Allowed. So to wrap up, as I said at the start, freedom comes with responsibility. There is a perception that anything goes on the web, especially when it comes to speech. That's incorrect, and I believe rightly so. First, you have national laws that curtail free speech. In the UK, for example, you have defamation laws and rules around hate speech. In Poland, Germany, and France, the promotion of Nazism is illegal. And even with its First Amendment tradition, there are real limits in the United States. And the second, I think, factor is that websites like YouTube, as I have explained, have a real interest in creating a community. And that requires hard judgments about what stays up and what comes down. Thank you.
Rachel, thank you. Let's go straight on to Joanna.
Good luck. Thank you, Justin. Hello, everyone. My name is Joanna Shields. I'm the chairman of Tech City. And for those of you who don't know, Tech City began, you've probably heard of the Silicon Roundabout. It began not too far from here. And in fact, you may not realize, but you're in the middle of London Technology Week. So after you leave this exciting gathering, you might think about considering attending some of the 200 events that are happening all across the Capitol this week. So I was asked to talk about why the US is preeminent in digital innovation. And don't let my American accent fool you. I've been here 14 years working on building some of the biggest global brands, internet brands outside the United States. But if you look not too far from here in East London and Tech City, what you'll see is that London has become a digital powerhouse. A study released just Monday this week by Boston Consulting Group and Bloomberg revealed the fact that the technology sector in London and Southeast is growing faster than San Francisco and Silicon Valley. By any measure, since 2010, the UK has made great progress, more progress than any country, in attracting entrepreneurs and increasing our digital competitiveness. Over the past 3 years, tech and digital businesses have contributed 27% of all the new jobs in London. In fact, this is what fueled the economic recovery. And outside of London, digital clusters are thriving too, and they reflect the unique strengths of our great knowledge centers in the UK and also our great cities. Britain is actually the most digital nation in the G20. In fact, 10% of our GDP will come from the internet economy in 2015. Technology is helping us reimagine every aspect of our lives and our economy, from medicine to education, from fashion to transportation. And in the process, it's giving us an opportunity to become a nation of innovators, a nation of groundbreakers, and a nation of creators. What you may not realize is today's job creators are not big corporations. In fact, in the last couple of years, they added 0.X% to the economy, or government for that matter, which has shrunk in the past couple of years, but high-growth firms, of which many are in the tech and digital sector. These entrepreneur-led businesses are making a disproportionate contribution to the economic growth of this country, and we must do everything possible to support them. To that end, this particular government has developed the world's most ambitious package for founders and investors anywhere in the world, from tax breaks for early-stage investment to R&D tax credits, to an innovative thing we call the patent box. So if you invent something in Britain, you only pay 10% tax on your profits. So I think what I wanted to say to all of you today is let's stop looking over our shoulder across the Atlantic for inspiration. We may not yet have technology companies worth tens of billions, but if we continue on the current course, we definitely will have them soon. This government has worked with the London Stock Exchange to make it easier for fast-growing companies to list. Last year, we saw the highest rate of tech IPOs since 2007, with 32 companies coming to market. And in the first quarter of this year, $2 billion was raised. We've already had 2 companies bought this year for $500 million. One was called DeepMind, that was purchased by Google, and the other is Natural Motion, which was bought by Zynga. Again, 2 prominent California companies. Finally, we've created programs here to support high-growth businesses called Future 50, which supports these fast-growing companies to ensure that they achieve their potential here in the UK and they contribute to our economy and the growth in jobs. But of course, we must do more. We must support and capitalize on our core digital strengths. We already are the world's leading e-commerce exporter, and British firms are making their mark globally. Our thriving advertising and creative industries take center stage in the global ideas race. And digital media, technology, and services are also thriving. We are trailblazing in big data. In fact, not too far from here in Holborn, we have the Open Data Institute. It's a global voice in championing transparency in government and open data and operates in 13 countries around the world. And the Turing Institute will soon create bridges between industry and academia. This is a true reflection of British ambition on a global scale. Our financial services technology is thriving, and some of the brightest stars in that industry are operating between here and Canary Wharf. The UK is blazing a trail in the Internet of Things as well, and we're set to be the next bright spot, connecting London and Cambridge in a lucrative circuit. But it's not just about technology, it's what technology enables us to do. A recent Nectar survey found that 80% of young people aged 16 to 20 in Britain have said they would like to start their own business in the next 5 years. This ambition is the gold dust that we need. And it reflects the fact that the Internet is the greatest empowerment device ever invented. New ideas can go from concept to reality in weeks, not years, and become great global sensations overnight. We must support this optimism and ambition and ensure that our children have the skills not just to participate, but to thrive in this new world. Coding and digital skills will be part of the national curriculum in September, and this is an incredibly powerful first step. But we must ensure that our kids fall in love with learning and build the skills that they need to adapt and change throughout their lives. We need to work with entrepreneurs and business builders to understand the skills that they need and help them solve the talent shortages. And by supporting apprenticeship programs, we can develop the skills and talent that we need right here at home. But regulators and institutions and courts must also keep up. It's their responsibility to be knowledgeable about how the Internet works so that in the pursuit of protecting free speech, we don't start limiting it. We cannot apply old norms and regulations to new disruptive models. We cannot apply old legislation and new ways of creating and sharing knowledge. To me, freedom and liberty are about self-determination and empowerment. It's about giving people the tools they need to succeed. And it's about reimagining the economic, social, and organizational systems that can create jobs and prosperity. And it's about making the UK a better society for future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joanna. You'll notice that each of our speakers is speaking almost as if they're speaking of a completely different subject. It's anarchic, it's free. We've designed it that way, and I suspect that, Jonah, you're going to keep up that tradition.
I am a traditionalist. First of all, as Justin said that someone on Twitter wanted to know why he was with so many right-wing nutters. I want to state for the record, I am the first right-wing nutter to come up here from this panel. Neither of these ladies know the handshake of a right-wing nutter I tested. I was asked to be both sort of substantive and entertaining, which is a very hard bill to fit. It kind of makes me want to be like the guy who wanted to be a taxidermist and a veterinarian, and that way he could promise you get your dog back no matter what. And so in that vein, I'm going to take a slightly different tack, in part because my co-panelists know the innovative sector and the tech sector so much better than I do, and meanwhile, I am pretty much a standard pundit. And as you know, a pundit in India means a wise man, a master of religion, science, philosophy, history, and literature. A pundit in the United States, and I believe in Britain, is somebody who will make any prediction unmanageable so long as they're not held accountable to it, and they're perfectly willing to change their opinion if there's an open bar involved. Today we heard quite a bit about competition and innovation and the important role that disruptors play, and I, as a huge fan of Deirdre McCloskey and Louis Zingales and the work that CPS does, I agree with all of that. But I think there's a sort of, at least an analogy that one can draw to the role that new media plays in at least in the United States, in terms of traditional media. For most of my lifetime, and most of your lifetimes, at least in the United States, the American press, the American media, was monopolized by a handful of institutions, 90% of whom were within a couple square miles, even a square blocks in Midtown Manhattan. The New York Times, ABC, CBS, NBC, Time, Newsweek, Life magazine, they all belong to a collective bubble, and they basically monopolized the narrative of what the news and the politics of the day was. Walter Cronkite used to end every broadcast with the statement, "And that's the way it is." Not, "That's the news we thought was important," not, "These are the things that we thought you should know," but with this absolutely mind-bogglingly arrogant, ontological, epistemological confidence that this is the way things are. The New York Times still has the motto, "All the news that's fit to print." There was this enormous arrogance and groupthink that basically defined the mainstream media in the United States. And we've only sort of seen it start to unravel recently. Now, an argument I would make in other contexts is that this period in the United States was actually a great parenthesis in American history. It has its roots in the New Deal and World War II, and the rise of television at a particular moment where Americans trusted big institutions to tell them what to think and how to think. But if you actually look in the history of media, America is actually reverting to the norm that we saw in the 1800s and the early 20th century, with lots of different voices, lots of different approaches, and I think that's a healthy thing. I'm a big believer, as a conservative, that there's really nothing new under the sun, and that the same sorts of patterns tend to develop over time. In the United States since World War II, two groups have been very successful at exploiting new media: pornographers and conservatives. I'm not going to talk about the pornographers right now, but if you want to see me afterwards, we can. But the conservatives were always very, very early adopters of innovative new media approaches. Ronald Reagan was elected in part because of the strengths that conservatives had developed with direct mail. The 1994 takeover by the Republicans of Congress was driven in large part by conservative success with talk radio. Conservatives were led by, I'm proud to say, my magazine, National Review. Conservatives led the move into the internet in the early days of the internet in the United States in terms of political coverage, in part because we were always looking for ways to go around the sort of the monastery of the elite media. And I think that that has been an incredibly healthy development. I want to give you one very small example of what I'm talking about. But I think it's funny, so why not? In 2012, Mitt Romney, it was revealed, had once put his dog on the roof of his car for a family vacation. It was in a kennel, but it was on the roof of his car, and he swore that the dog liked it, that everything was fine, and there was no big deal. He loved to ride up there and all the rest. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. What I do know is that the mainstream media went bonkers about it. New York Times columnist Gail Collins, I believe, wrote 35 columns mentioning Mitt Romney with the dog in the crate on the roof of his car. It was constantly brought up as this sort of subliminal or actually not too subtle hint that he was sort of a bad, mean person, because Americans, like the Brits, we love our dogs. Well, a fellow at the Daily Caller and some other journalists on the right discovered that in Barack Obama's memoir, he talked about how when he lived in Indonesia as a kid, he had eaten dog. Now, there is a well-established finding in the social science literature about American politics that Americans don't like to hear about politicians eating dogs. And it's one of these quirks of the American character. You're not supposed to eat dogs. And so a bunch of us on Twitter in particular had great fun with this. And we didn't think it was a real issue. We didn't think the Mitt Romney thing was a real issue. But if the standard is that something that you did a very long time ago that relates to being mean to dogs is somehow relevant to your character, well, we can play that game too. And so whatever the public policy issue was, you know, Mitt Romney wants to cut taxes for the rich, we would say, yeah, but, you know, Obama ate a dog. Or, you know, inequality has grown over the last 40 years. Maybe, but Obama ate a dog. And we just wouldn't let go of it. And we had and people would, the left went crazy beating us up saying, you know, why do you think this is irrelevant? Why are you making such a big deal out of it? And it was totally because we were just turning the tables on something that the mainstream media did. Now, here's the funny part. No major newspaper or media outlet covered the Obama ate a dog thing. They just completely ignored it. And yet at the 2012 White House Correspondents' Dinner, which is basically the papal conclave for the elite media in the United States, Barack Obama felt he absolutely had to defuse this whole dog-eating issue. And he made several jokes about it. And it's an interesting thing. If you were a writer for the Washington Post or the New York Times, you'd have to wonder, why is he bringing up this dog-eating? Because it wasn't something that they thought was relevant. But it was relevant because social media let us get that argument and get those taunts out there in a way that the old mainstream media never would have allowed. And so and again, my point here is not that the wonders and glories of the internet is that it allows conservatives to be as asinine as liberals when it comes to politics, although that is clearly one of the results. The lesson is that it levels the playing field of ideas. It allows people who are locked out of the clerisy to actually have their point of view put in. And in a society where conservatives were essentially locked out of the mainstream argument to a large extent, from popular culture, from academia, from Hollywood, and from the mainstream press, that is a clear boon to conservatives. But I think the more important point, however, is that the new media isn't a panacea. It isn't this wonderful, you know, whether it's the internet or YouTube and all of these things, which I think are glorious boons to mankind, and they teach us some important things. In a way, you could say that Marshall McLuhan was sort of right, that sometimes the medium is the message. But in the case of conservatives or a case of lovers of liberty or libertarianism or however you want to call it, the message is much larger than the medium. And you can learn some important things about the role of innovation and disrupting established norms and all of the rest by the incredible success of the new media. But at the end of the day, what the message that conservatives have to convey is actually much more timeless and much larger than it. And one of the great challenges for conservatives, one second. I'm sorry, I smoked an enormous amount of pot before I got here, and I get terrible dry mouth. That joke works better on college campuses and in Colorado. But one of the great challenges of the one of the great challenges that the internet brings is that it fuels the ability of people everywhere to get only the news and information that they want to get, and causes us to basically cocoon and bubble. And there's plenty of polling data to show that this is the case, that people tend to get the information from where they want to get it. This is only natural. Media institutions are, in a sense, have always been community builders. They've always been centerpieces of communities. Alexis de Tocqueville, when he came to the United States in the 1830s, he said that the backbone of America are associations, these civil societies, these Burkean little platoons. And he said the backbone of these associations are newspapers. He says that newspapers create associations and associations create newspapers. And that is the case today. If you look around what the internet does best is it allows people from geographically dispersed areas to form virtual communities. That's what Facebook does. That's what Reddit does. That's what YouTube does. Sometimes the comment sections fill up with people who think if you say something in all caps, it has to be true. But the reality is that this is what the internet does, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when it comes to news and information, the problem is it allows people to hunker down in their bunkers. And the challenge for conservatives is to figure out a way to get their message out to people that aren't members of this the culture of liberty or the community of liberty, and make the community of liberty seem attractive to them. And then you can do a lot of that on social media, but at the end of the day, the real trick is taking to heart the importance of persuasion. In America right now, we have this very frustrating fight where everyone thinks the only way to become a Republican candidate and to do anything for America is to be more principled than everybody else. We have a lot of nostalgia for Ronald Reagan. And what has two thumbs and loves Ronald Reagan? This guy. But at the end of the day, one thing Ronald Reagan great was that he was a persuasive politician. And that's one of the things that conservatives have lost, is that they tend to go around talking to audiences that only agree with them. Ted Cruz, senator from Texas, he used to say during the government shutdown crisis, everywhere I go, I talk to audiences that want to get rid of Obamacare. Well, I'm absolutely sure that that's true. Everywhere Ted goes, I'm sure when he speaks to the Tea Party meeting in Abilene, Texas, everybody in the audience wants to get rid of Obamacare. It reminds me of when Richard Nixon was once asked if he believed that overpopulation was really a problem. And he said, well, of course it's really a problem. I mean, everywhere I go, I see huge crowds. Maybe it's because you're president of the United States. So anyway, I want to just conclude by saying that there are lots of ways to make this be persuasive and get people to join this community of liberty. And we've heard a lot about them today, and hopefully we'll hear a lot more about them. But the one thing, as a true blue right-wing nutter, that I think that people need to take to heart is to be happy warriors, to enjoy life a little bit. One of the great disadvantages that conservatives have is that we are great at scolding people, and we are great at scowling. Nothing infuriates the left more than a conservative who smiles, who can tell a joke about himself, who doesn't take himself too seriously, who actually enjoys life. And that's the real irony, is that it's our message of expanding individual liberty, of letting people become the captains of themselves, or as Lord Saatchi says, the captains of our souls, that is the only real route to happiness. And if you can show people in the way you talk and the way you try to win people over that you're not a hater, that you want to win people over, that you enjoy life, and that our community of liberty is the best guarantee for how you can enjoy life too, then I think we're going to win. Thank you all very much.
Brilliant. Okay, we got 20 minutes or so, and thank you. The iPad arrives, if that's what it is, and actually, I work for the BBC. I should probably say the handheld device arrives, but what the hell? The other thing, of course, Jonah, occurs to me that the net does, as well as providing kind of freedom across the board, it also allows people to get in touch much more easily than they used to be, and you are much more quickly corrected or attacked, and that is in many respects a difficult thing for broadcasters in particular, but also unquestionably a good thing. And it allows that kind of pedantry that, is it fair to say, American newspapers tend to have, particularly on their front pages? You think of, I think particular of the day that Obama was elected, and the New York Times said Barack Obama elected president, and the Washington Post 44th president elected, and the online version of The Onion, the satirical newspaper, their headline was "Black Man Given Nation's Worst Job," which kind of brought a vividness, whether or not you agreed with the sentiment. You knew what they were getting at, and it was there, and it was readable, and it was accessible to huge numbers of people in a way that in the past, as you say, those thoughts wouldn't have been. Let me throw it open to people. Let me start, though, by asking you this, Rachel, because it really occurred during the course of what you were saying. The power that you have, the salience that Google has, the decisions that you're taking on all of our behalf about what is accessible and what is not accessible, what you show, what you don't, what you can get to and find and what you don't, and the money, obviously, that you make. Why are you not Standard Oil? I mean, what reason is there, in the name of freedom, and particularly economic freedom, for not looking at whether or not the big tech companies need to be broken up?
We've just been the subject of a long antitrust investigation at the Federal Trade Commission and an ongoing investigation in the European Commission. So it's a very reasonable question to ask. I mean, I think from our perspective, we're 16 years old. We've been a company that has grown very quickly, and we've been very fortunate. You know, we've got lots of things right. We have a product, search, which people really, really love, and which we've been able to make money from in ways that have sort of fueled an entire ecosystem. And I think the sort of two parts, I think, to the question you're asking is, one, you know, I think just because you are a company that has been successful and has grown to a certain size, what should be the consequences of that? And I think Maurice raised that issue earlier. I think that, you know, certainly from where I sit, and I don't know so much about other markets and industries, I think that the competition online, the internet has really lowered barriers to entry. I think companies grow up very quickly. They die away very quickly. If you look at the sort of AOL, you know, sometimes I talk to younger people who don't even know what AOL is anymore. You look at what happened to the ascendancy of Yahoo and then the descent of Yahoo. I think even if you look at areas where we're involved, so we have a very popular browser, which some of you may use, which helps you get onto the web, called Chrome, and we also have a mobile operating system called Android. They're both very popular. Android's the most popular operating system mobile operating system in the world, and Chrome is one of the most popular browsers. You know, 15, 20 years ago, browsers was Internet Explorer. There was no other way of getting onto the web but Internet Explorer, and people used to think, well, what are we going to do about Internet Explorer? They did have antitrust action against them, and the European Commission took some action, but actually what came along is two better browsers that were better for people. They were faster, they were more secure, they did things that people wanted, and they were Chrome, which is owned by us, and Firefox, which is run by a not-for-profit. And if you look at mobile operating systems, very much the assumption would have been that Microsoft, which owned the operating systems in the PC market, would go on to be very successful. And none of those things turned out to be true. Actually, what turned out to be true in the mobile operating system market was two companies, one of whom had a lot of experience of operating systems was Apple, and one who had no experience of operating systems, which was Google with Android. So I think that a lot of the assumptions in that question are very static assumptions about the way that markets work. I think that markets are much more fluid than people think, and I think that is particularly true online. And so I think that, you know, things just change incredibly quickly. I mean, look at Nokia and BlackBerry. They're not online, but they're even technology companies on the hardware side. Think how quickly, BlackBerry came from nowhere and went nowhere. And so I think that it's a very static view of the world. I think they're reasonable questions to ask. We're a large company now. They're absolutely right. It's, you know, absolutely right that, you know, regulators look at us.
Wouldn't Standard Oil have said the same thing, though? I mean, are you saying that the tech industry is of itself so different, it contains within itself the seeds of its own quite sudden destruction at a top corporate level that you don't need to worry about?
I don't know enough about the oil industry, and I get nervous about talking about industries that I don't know about. What I do know about is tech, and that you have a company like Google that came from nowhere in 16 years. You had a company like Facebook that came from nowhere in 10 years. You have a company like WhatsApp, which has over 500 million users and has 50 employees. And so I'm saying these things can come and go very quickly. Users have people online have huge amounts of choice. If you look at a company like Google, the way people find information has changed significantly in the last 5 years. So yes, we're the most popular search engine in Europe, but how many of you get news articles now from Twitter? You go and follow people on Twitter, and that's actually how you find news information. How many newspapers are actually getting more referrals from somewhere like Facebook than somewhere like Google? And how many of you, when you're doing a search for a commercial search to actually go and buy something, you know, like my nephew's present, where did I go? I went to Amazon. I didn't necessarily go to Google. So I think that the definitions are very different, and I think that the competition is different.
Jonah, I'd only add one quick point, which I think Rachel's absolutely right. You know, creative destruction is faster than it's ever been. But at least in the United States, I don't know how it works in the EU or in the UK, it is not against the law to have a monopoly. It is against the law to have an abusive monopoly, to abuse your monopoly power. I don't think Google is anything like a monopoly, but Standard Oil, you can make the case, abused its monopoly power to the detriment of consumers. I don't think there's any evidence that Google does anything that's to the detriment of consumers, and I think that's an important criteria that you have to ask, if you're going to make the comparison.
Question off the iPad. For you, Joanna, is there anything David Cameron's government ought to be doing to encourage tech and new media to come to Britain? Are there things that this government hasn't done that it should have done?
Well, I think, 4 years ago when the Tech City experiment started, there was just a small number of tech firms in East London. And I think it was the recognition that the internet meant that models like Rachel and Jonah are describing could mean that you could go from a startup to a sensation in a very short period of time. So we'd better invest in and come up with the ideas and the policies that are going to support the growth of a tech industry here. So what happened there is the government opened up its doors to the entrepreneurial community and said, what is it that you need? So this is the best policy making, is always understanding what those who have the potential to create great wealth and prosperity need from you. So opening up the door, we had these Tech City breakfasts at number 10. Hundreds of people, coming to number 10 and feeding into this policy ideas machine, if you will, and hence why we had all of these great sort of policies that support entrepreneurs.
Well, what did you get out of it? And are you happy with what you got out of it?
Well, what we got out of it is 27% of all job growth in the capital came from these startup firms, and investing in their future and making sure that they scale up so that in the next 5-10 years we can have a sensation like a Google or Facebook.
Will we?
Is really what.
I mean, that's a fascinating question, because Google, Facebook, all the rest of them,
yeah.
PayPal, I don't know, Netflix, all the other kind of the companies operating in this sphere,
yeah.
None of them are British. Now, you are telling these people that these companies and the freedoms that they offer, both in terms of the freedom to set the thing up and do it, and the benefits that they bring, those things will soon be British, these global brands.
Well, what I'm saying is that we have just as strong a chance as other countries, but we're creating the policies so that we can improve that chance. So what happened after the dot-com recession is that British entrepreneurs entrenched. They went to work for big banks. They went back into established industries. What American entrepreneurs did is they licked their wounds for a little bit, and then they started new companies. So the companies that were started just after the dot-com crash, the Facebooks, for instance, of the world, are now the big leaders and the emerging leaders. And what happened is there was a gap in time whereby British entrepreneurs weren't getting the support that they needed, and they went back into established industries. Starting in about 2010, that things got difficult again, and there was a whole generation of young people that left university and could not find jobs. So they said, look, they looked across the pond and they said, the American entrepreneurs that are our age are making a lot of money and they're having big success. We can't find a job anyway, so let's do it. And they literally started building companies in record numbers. And the recognition of that movement that was happening in East London and all across the country, and the smart policy was recognizing there's a chance if we nurture these companies and we give them the support that they need, that they will have a chance to emerge and become one of these big brands in the future. So that's what happened.
Joan, another question from the iPad. Why was Fox News most recently found to be the US's most trusted TV news source?
Because it's the most trustworthy TV news source. It was an interesting poll, but actually that finding has been established for quite a while. Roger Ailes had this absolutely bizarre idea. He looked at that monolith of the mainstream media that I was talking about before, and he said, well, my hunch is about 51% of the American people are being underserved. Maybe I'll see if I can fill that niche. And it turned out that he could. And one of the things I think Fox News, which absolutely in its opinion shows veers very obviously right. But one of the things that's important and interesting about Fox News is that, first of all, it's an actual news network. MSNBC has no news reporters on it anymore, and it's actually less trusted by liberals I mean, only something like 5% of liberals believe that MSNBC.
Yeah, we should make clear MSNBC is the left-wing version of Fox. In case
Right. They're trying to be the left-wing version of Fox, but the problem is that because they don't understand Fox, they've become the left-wing version of the left-wing caricature of what Fox News is. And one of the things I think that a lot of people don't understand about Fox is that, and you probably have some experience with this given Rupert Murdoch's history, is that it is much less conservative than it is populist. Its approach is to say, look at those idiots in Washington, look what those guys in New York, look what those fat cats are doing. Culturally, its assumption is that this is that America is a pretty good country, and that it's okay to like it. And that runs completely counter, and sometimes it's very subtle, but in terms of their story selection and the rest, they cover stories that the mainstream media is embarrassed to cover because they actually reflect well on the United States of America.
Another question, and it's about data, Rachel, and I suppose it falls to you. How free are we when the data that is mined about us is then used by companies for their commercial benefit, but not necessarily in a way that we know about? Is that an area, do you think, where there is going to be change and progress?
Yeah, look, I think that privacy and security are very important issues for internet companies like Google. I think that they're two sides of the same coin, because without security, you cannot have privacy. I think it's one of the reasons that the PRISM revelations from last summer, which involved both the NSA and GCHQ, were so depressing to so many of us. It was, pretty much of anathema that one's own government would be trying to find weaknesses in one's systems so that they can gain access to information without our knowledge. You would expect your own government not to be trying to probe weaknesses, but if they found them, to be coming to you with them. So I think that there's a huge part around security, which is really, really important, and it's why we encrypt a lot of stuff and why we've made huge strides to make sure that our data is really, really secure. Then I think you rightly asked the question that, okay, that's what we get, that the government can't hopefully get access to the data without going through a process of warrants, etc. And then what is Google doing with data? I think that, obviously we process large amounts of data. If you want to have a Gmail account with Google, I can't deliver an email to you unless, the email is stored on our servers. And, we created Gmail because we wanted it to be unlimited storage, which at the time when we created Gmail was very unusual. So, people have huge numbers of emails in their Gmail systems. And the way that we try to think about it is the data we collect is central to the provision of the service. We try to provide services that are free. We do that by providing advertising. We try and provide the advertising in as relevant a way as possible. And we try to be as transparent as possible about the data we collect, also give you controls over it.
But does your knowledge of me add to my freedom or detract from it?
I mean, I don't sort of know how necessarily to answer that question. I think that our products can massively contribute to your freedom and your ability to find information and your ability to communicate with people. I think it's important that you understand about the data we collect when you're using those products, and that we give you choices. For example, you can choose to search using, what we call incognito mode, so that none of the search history is collected. And if you decide that you don't like our Gmail service anymore because for whatever reason, we make it incredibly easy for you to take all your emails out and go to another provider, which I think is also important, increasing trust. But I think these are important questions. I tend to think that the regulatory solutions need to be harm-based. They need to be focused on what the harms are, because I also think that there is a risk that you throw out the baby with the bathwater, and I think that there are huge innovations that will come from understanding and using data, and I think that it would be a shame if that gets sort of regulated out of existence.
Another couple of questions. Should reciprocity be required for Russia Today, Press TV, companies like that, so that if they don't show the BBC or Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, allow them to broadcast in their countries, they shouldn't be allowed to broadcast here? I'm not quite sure who that would go to, really, but I mean, it's an interesting idea, isn't it, Jonah? Are you a believer in simply allowing the chips to fall where they are, or should governments be involved still in this age with saying to countries, if you don't let our free media in to where you are, you can't propagandize where we are?
Yeah, I'm very reluctant to buy into that for a couple of reasons. One, I'm not, as a free marketer, I'm not a big believer in protectionism and picking winners and losers. And what you're basically doing is you're saying that we're going to basically have trade tariff against a particular product, be it as awful a product as Russia today is, I think we can have the confidence that it lets the American people or the British people be exposed to it. I also, as a matter of public diplomacy, it would make me a little nervous to say that American news channels are the American equivalent of Russia today. They are not propaganda channels. I mean, Voice of America is a sort of a slightly different thing, but it certainly Voice of America doesn't come close to the actual propagandizing for America the way that Russia today, aggressively lies and distorts events for its own advantage.
Here's a question that goes, Jonah, and I think it's probably again for you, or possibly to Rachel involved. I don't know what the figures are, but I think I'm right in saying that employees of Google gave overwhelmingly more money to Obama than they did to Romney. It is fair to say that the left in America have harnessed the power of the internet, and certainly the Obama campaign harnessed it very successfully in both of his presidential campaigns. A lot of those operatives are going to come here now. What's the state of play with the right's ability to harness the power, particularly of social media, but also that kind of reciprocity thing, that ability to have conversations? Has it been genuinely lacking? Are they catching up? Where do you stand?
This is something that goes back and forth for years. In 2000, John McCain was credited as having this incredibly innovative web presence because he actually put the ability to donate online on his website. And then Howard Dean, the Democrat, was celebrated for being very good. It turns out that the best way to have a good web strategy for a politician is to be a popular politician. And people will go to your website. And if you are not a popular politician, people don't go to your website. It is absolutely true that Mitt Romney, that Barack Obama did very well with new media, and he really was a quantum step forward. But he also had a fantastic ground game that translated itself into a fantastic web presence.
But it is the data and the use of data, isn't it? And that is
true.
Something that they were terribly good at, that I just wonder what...
That's true. Well, the Republicans now have, they did the very smart thing, which is that Republicans historically have a real problem of being beholden to the consultant class of the Republican Party. And their solution is always to give more money to the consultants who then cut more ads that no one watches and all the rest. And looking at the success that Obama had in 2008 and 2012, they said, maybe we should do what they do and actually hire people from Silicon Valley who are experts on the media stuff or the internet stuff, and we'll provide the message. And that's what they're doing now. And so my guess is that we're going to see a spate of stories come 2016 about how the Republicans have closed the gap on the disadvantages on the web, because that's the way it always seems to work, is that wherever the intensity is in politics, it translates itself onto the web as well.
We've overrun the pips. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause, please, for our panelists. Thank you very much.